Hi, this is Shauna. Before we get to today's guest, I want to take a minute to learn more about you, the listener. We've put together a short survey at fueltalent.com/podcast to gather information on who's listening and to give you a chance to make suggestions and comments about the show. I want What Fuels You to be a great resource for you and your interests, and I hope these interviews give you practical advice along with inspiration for your career and life. Help us continue to serve you better by going to fueltalent.com/podcast. Thank you so much. Now let's start today's show. Hi, this is Shauna, the CEO and founder of Fuel Talent. One of the things I have loved most in my 25-year recruiting career has always been the stories that people tell. Stories of leadership, career choices, company ideas, and team building. My inspiration for starting the What Fuels You podcast came from being curious about people's lives and wanting to help share their stories. What path brought them to this place? What decisions did they make that led to failures and successes? Who influenced those decisions, and what lessons were learned along the way? I hope you enjoy the What Fuels You podcast. Today's guest on the What Fuels You podcast is Omri Gazitt. Omri is the co-founder and CEO of Aserto, an authorization startup and his third entrepreneurial venture. He's spent the majority of his 30-year career working on developer and infrastructure technology, most recently as the CPO of Puppet. Previously, he was the VP and GM of HP's cloud-native platform and general manager at Microsoft, with responsibilities for Azure, SQL Server, application server, and the .NET framework. Welcome, Omri. Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with you.
Oh, thanks. Okay, I'm going to hit you with the rapid fire, starting with, you're such an incredibly accomplished executive, but your engineering background is pretty insane. So I'm curious this is just a hack for me. What's a great question to ask an engineer in an interview to vet them?
I would say, what's your favorite programming language and why?
Yeah. And is the why to, assess their curiosity level or kind of how much they love to kind of tinker with different things?
Yeah, I think, people have their proclivities around programming languages. And it's always interesting to hear, like, the deeper one gets in terms of, describing why they like something, the more depth you can get out of that particular answer, right? So engineers that are like, yeah, I programmed in Java once upon a time, and it's like the developer business is such a fashion business. Every 5 or 10 years, there's kind of like new things, and
right.
In some areas of engineering, like front-end engineering, it seems like every 3 to 6 months you have a new framework.
Right. So that's what it does seem like. And I don't even do engineering recruiting, but I hear my team on the floor talking about it. And I'm like, wait, 6 months ago, I wasn't hearing that word. And now I'm hearing it all the time. So super curious. That's helpful. Is there any sort of movie that you somehow seem to watch on repeat that you love?
Yeah, my family would say that I've probably watched The Matrix more time than I care to admit. That answer is probably was a good answer 10 years ago. I found myself going back to The Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, that's so funny. Anyone asks me my favorite movie, I always say Shawshank Redemption, but it's not one that I necessarily want to watch all the time. I have to be in like the headspace for it, but it's so well done and so well acted.
Exactly. Everything about it. And, I had zero expectations. The title, I think really tanked the movie in terms of its ability to succeed in the box office. But right. I think there are very few movies that stand the test of time the way that one does.
I agree. Okay. Since you are from Israel, I'm curious, what's your favorite beach in Israel, favorite area to visit?
Herzliya Beach and Tel Aviv Beach are really nice. My sister lives in Haifa, so whenever we go to visit, we'll definitely stop by there. And Eilat, in the south is also wonderful. Completely different feel, very hot by the Red Sea. But yeah, definitely a set of that. We definitely get to the beach when we go to Israel.
Yeah. It's funny because I've been there maybe 3 times only, but mostly Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and then in the north. But I've not done the whole like, let me just go explore the beaches of Israel. And everybody talks about them. I've obviously been to Tel Aviv, but never Eilat, which is sad, and it's on my list. Okay, given that you have 3 kids, right?
Mhm.
So what would your kids, I guess, what 3 words would your kids use to describe you?
Um, I would say quirky, intense, um, and supportive, hopefully. At least that
Yeah.
one's the aspirational one, right?
Yeah, okay, we got it aspirational. That's so funny because when we first got on, I started to tell you that I was listening to this like parenting book, which I never do. And I was like, I'm not doing any of these things. And I thought I was kind of on track. They're pretty good kids, but you know what I mean? It's like the hardest job. So aspirationally supportive is good. What's your favorite place to ski?
Ooh, that's an excellent one. It would have to be between Whistler and Park City. And the common denominator is that both have great villages and lots of terrain. Whistler is, of course, very close. I've been there, almost every year, I would say, almost every winter. But the snow quality is, can be good or bad. And in Park City, it's almost always good.
Yeah, you have to be a really good skier in Whistler, the best.
Mhm.
What's your favorite sport or the best sport that you like to watch? And then within that, who's your favorite player?
Wow, let's see. So when I grew up in Israel, it was soccer and basketball, or football, as we like to call it. And when I moved to the US, I really didn't get baseball, maybe still don't. Like, I didn't get football. And now I would say it's probably my favorite sport to watch. I still like to watch basketball, but only playoff basketball because 82 games in a season is a little much. But football, at first I just didn't really, I didn't understand all the nuances, and I found it to be a very strategic game. And in fact, talking to football players or ex-football players, it's just fascinating to understand, to see how much strategy there is.
Yeah.
It just seems very, kind of pedestrian when like you first watch it. And then when you start really getting deep into it, it's just amazing how layered it is.
Yeah. You can always tell the people that understand the layers when you're watching it with them. And I'm just like, oh, yay, touchdown. Those are the basic pedestrian views from where I sit. But yeah, definitely super layered. So are you a Seahawks fan?
I am a Seahawks fan, and you asked who my favorite player is, and so Russell Wilson certainly was right up there, and I found him to be just kind of the combination of the human and the player, and how he's evolved to be really fascinating too, because he used to he played differently earlier in his career than he does now.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really sad to see him go.
I know it is sad. Well, I also feel like, I mean, maybe it's just with Sierra and her influence. I don't really know, but it seems like he's also a pretty good businessman. And he's
Yeah.
definitely taking advantage of his fame right now as far as visibility and getting involved with so many different things. So yeah. Okay. So are you an introvert or an extrovert?
I think I'm more of an extrovert. I grew up kind of a little bit awkward and shy, but I've always derived a lot of energy from interacting with people. And I
Mm-hmm.
find that, everybody has their kind of level of fatigue that they get to when they have to be on all the time. But, I really do love interacting with people. And especially when I get together with friends, I get just so much energy from that.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. So is there a CEO who you most admire or who you follow closely?
Um, let's see. I really did admire and still do Bill Gates. I found him to be just brilliant, and also, human, and having some, some inhibitors as well in his life. And I think folks like that are able to kind of overcome some of the things that are more difficult for them personality wise always
Yeah.
inspire me. Yeah, I mean uh, he's not universally, but greatly admired. And I think 20 years ago that wasn't true. 20 years ago he was considered basically kind of like blood-sucking vampire of the software industry. And I think the work that he's done over the last 15 or 20 years has been really remarkable. And, he's really created a second career for himself and focused on making the world a better place. So I have a lot of admiration for that.
Yeah, the giving back part is definitely admirable. So I'm super curious, and we're going to get there on how you even ended up in Seattle, but tell me about your upbringing and the layered history kind of your childhood.
Yeah, so I grew up in Israel. I was born there. And the reason why I don't sound like an Israeli, even though I can do a pretty mean Israeli accent, is that early on in life, when I was 4, my dad did his postdoc in New York. And so we lived in New Jersey in Fort Lee for 3 years. And I got, I learned English, obviously, as in that formative phase. So I can speak English the way, an American would, because the accent you get and you never forget. But then, we moved again. We moved back to Israel, and then we moved back to the United States when I was in high school. And that was harder because even though I had kind of like the accent was good, I had almost no vocabulary, and I would, every once in a while intersperse some Hebrew words with my English because it just, for whatever reason, the region of the brain that's associated with language made me do it. And so it took a few months for me to actually gain enough confidence to be able to, kind of.
And kids are brutal. I'm going to make you do this next couple sentences with your Israeli accent because I miss it. I want to go. I think I'm going to go this fall, but I absolutely love it. So. Okay, so tell me, how would you describe your childhood? Where specifically were you living in Israel?
In my Israeli accent, you'll say?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I grew up in Jerusalem.
Ken.
Jerusalem was a fun city to grow up in. And okay, I'm going to stop now.
No, I love it. I love
it. I would say that it was kind of a tough neighborhood where I grew up. Going back and visiting with my family, with my wife and kids was interesting because I'm like, wow, I kind of grew up in the projects in Jerusalem. It's didn't really kind of think of it at that time that way, but it's a tough neighborhood. And, I would say that coming from the United States and being kind of a smart and quirky kid was hard. Mm-hmm. So got picked on a lot, and I had to learn a little bit how to stand up for myself. And
so do you have a lot of siblings?
I have a sister and a brother, both younger.
And so when you say the projects, how is it laid out there? Is it by neighborhood? I mean, I've gone there obviously as an American visiting and hitting all the spots, but never, of course, lived in Jerusalem. So what was the home situation like, and what was the neighborhood like as far as, was there diversity of different religious, levels?
Yeah, so Israel is an interesting place. When I grew up, originally I would say it was the majority of Jews that lived in Israel came from Europe and Eastern Europe. And, in 1948, there was an influx of Jews that came from Africa and from the Middle East, Mizrahi Jews. And my mom is an Ashkenazi Jew. My dad was born in Morocco, was born in Africa. And they were, considered a mixed marriage in Israel at the time. So, I guess we call it biracial here. And there was definitely kind of a tension between, around that. I think it's the closest thing that, Israel has to kind of a racial tension. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I would say that the political system was shifting. It was the majority of Israelis were becoming, Mizrahim, and they basically were key to electing new governments. And so there was this change going on in Israel. And I was kind of neither here nor there. When it's almost you're not quite this enough and you're not quite that enough. And I recall that being, it wasn't a huge part of my childhood, but there was definitely some element of that because, there was a little bit of that associated with, um, with how I perceived, I was, like how I needed to survive, how I needed to think about interacting with others.
It's so interesting because after doing so many of these podcasts and listening to people, and several, as you know, that I've known, others that I've gotten to know a little bit, and then people that I'm just getting to know, there's such a thread of just stories of discrimination and hate that just make me crazy because there's no real reason for it.
Yeah, and in fact, I think that's exactly right. So growing up in Israel, I had a little bit of that, so I have a model for what that looks like in my head. And then moving to the United States, again, at 15 or 16, again, high school, awkward age and awkward transitions. And, a lot of people really nice. And then at the same time, I encountered like real anti-Semitism, like kids in my German class that were like, basically writing swastikas on the board and on their forehead, all to, just basically, make my life miserable, so to speak.
What are you talking about? Wait, this is in New Jersey?
This was in Nashville.
Oh, then you went to Nashville. Okay.
Exactly.
I missed that part because I'm like, New Jersey. So was there, I guess, other Jewish kids in your class? And what did the teachers do? Like,
the teacher was horrified. Teacher was, it was a German and had a PhD in teaching. And she basically was like, this is a part of our history that we wish never happened. And she was trying to explain how terrible that was to the kids. And Jewish kids that were at the school heard about this somehow and came up to me and they were like, who do we need to beat up? And I'm like, no, you don't need to beat anybody up. This is kind of my thing. But I got this view. I was like, wow, this is what anti-Semitism is. It's like, I grew up in a Jewish majority, country, and now I'm feeling what it's like to, kind of be on the other side of that. And there's a lot of soul searching that kind of went into that period where I was trying to figure out like, how to overcome the feeling of anger that I had.
Right.
And ultimately kind of realized that you don't want to fight that kind of hate with just, the opposite kind of hate.
Right. Like it doesn't get you anywhere to hate with hate. A lot of times it's just ignorance, even though that's not a hall pass. It's just people haven't had exposure and they don't know. And it's all fear-based. But I do think it's fascinating to hear these stories. And then you usually hear, I'd just be curious to know where those people are now, like what happened to them? That can't be a good life to live like that.
Exactly.
So I'm guessing you were probably pretty good in school. And did that give you kind of a different level of confidence, or were you trying to kind of downplay your smarts?
It depended on the kind of the situation. And I was part of, kind of schools that had these special programs and were selective high schools. And so there, there's no problem in, kind of in being smart and being able to have some confidence in that. I also quickly found out, in my heart of hearts, I realized I wasn't the smartest. And so trying to find an identity was kind of difficult. One of the things I learned about myself is that moving a lot was difficult, but it also created some, level of resilience and also adaptability. And I think if there's something that I keep on coming back to, that I think overall was hard at the time, but I think was a great life lesson to learn, was how to land in new situations and take them in and adapt so that you can become successful in those situations. And so that moving a lot, I think, helped quite a bit there.
Yeah. And what were you kind of passionate about or interested in? I'm glad nobody asks me this because I'm like in high school, I'm like, we were just trying to survive. But were you, I guess, into music, into sports, into partying, like into science? What were you kind of psyched about outside of school?
I think the biggest things for me were exactly those things. So music, sports, I wasn't really all that good at. And as a kid, you try different things, play basketball, play tennis, but was never good enough to actually, do those things seriously at a, kind of a high school level, a varsity level. But I was really into science, and I thought that all I wanted to be is a physicist. I wanted to invent the warp drive. That's what I wanted to do, right? And it was kind of a nice fantasy. And over time, I realized as I got through high school and then through college that was, at best, I could graduate with a physics degree, even though that was going to be really hard. But at best, I was going to be a mediocre physicist.
Yeah.
And so kind of coming to terms with the fact that, no, I wasn't quite smart enough. If there was one Nobel laureate from Rice University, like in class of 1992, it certainly wouldn't be me.
That's so funny. Who was guiding you through that whole application process through college? I mean, now with the helicopter parenting and the hiring of the tutors and the educators, did you have a roadmap for that? Because your parents were from Israel, and how did that kind of ultimately land you at Rice?
Yeah, so I was going to go back to Israel to serve in the military. There's some weird situation where I was able to graduate from high school 1 year early. And it's kind of a funny story. I'll give a 30-second version of it. I was in Texas at the time. And the Texas principal basically said, I won't accept any of the credits that you had in Israel unless it says that there are credits. And the system was different. We had 13 subjects, not 6 credits. So my dad had a trip to Israel, and I printed out some letter on a dot matrix printer that I had that he basically had the principal sign. And all of a sudden I had twice the number of credits from Israel.
Oh, nice.
Instead of 0, I had 13.
Yeah. Not just resilient and adaptable, but also resourceful and driven. I like
crafty,
it.
Exactly.
Crafty.
So I said, oh, really? You're going to make me,
yeah.
No, I'm going to gain a year instead. So I graduated early. And at that point, it looked like I could just do a year of college and then go back to Israel and serve in the military. That was very important to me. And a year became 2 years, and 2 years became 3 years. But you asked about how I ended up going and where I selected. My parents thought, hey, apply everywhere, and we don't make tons of money, and so if you get in, you'll likely get a scholarship, and all will be good. I applied in a lot of different places, kind of top tier schools like the Stanfords and the Berkeleys and the MITs, and got into almost none of them. I think I did get into Caltech, which I was very happy about, but all of them were just outside of the budget. And my dad was teaching at University of Cincinnati, or doing research there, and so that was going to be free. And I did get into Rice, which was at the time, still, very well regarded in Texas. And I really wanted to go there, but again, didn't have the money. So I wrote them a letter, and I said, hey, love to come here, but I need some help. And I got a letter back from the chemistry department saying, funny, you should mention, we were just about to contact you. We have a scholarship for you. It's a 1-year scholarship for full tuition. And so I felt like the stars had lined up.
Oh, yeah.
So I was really happy.
The chemistry. But you ended up studying computer science, not chemistry.
I did. So yeah, I kind of did a little bit of a
little switcheroo, little bait and switch. Yeah.
They weren't super happy about it. And in fact, it was a 1-year scholarship. And so by the end of that year, I had to go back and figure out what it was going to do. So I had 2 choices. I could transfer to University of Florida, where my dad was, again, faculty, and that was going to be free. And that was kind of plan A. But plan B was going to figure out whether I could make enough money that summer to afford paying for the second year. And, I obviously, I knew that was in the card. So I started working pretty soon after I got to Rice. And so that kind of work study program that I undertook really kind of made it possible for me to do 2 things. One is pay for the next year and then the next year. And then the other thing was really kind of gain a lot of self-confidence and independence, which was really important for me and my personality at the time. So
yeah. What were you doing to make money?
At first, I worked as just doing tech support in the computer lab. so supporting PCs and Macs. And then as I gained a little bit more skill and confidence programming, I started doing some of those things. So I did a contract programming job for the University of Texas microbiology grad school department, and that was a huge learning experience. I set out to build something that was just too sophisticated for what I was able to pull off at the time, and I failed. And it was just super difficult to go back to those folks and say, hey, I tried to go build this natural language processing thing for you and it didn't work. And what do you want to do?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But what an incredible experience to get that type of, again, just like resilience, adaptability, grit, resourcefulness, like you're learning all of that on the job and making money and, paying for school and keeping you at Rice. So tell me about like exiting from Rice, because a lot of people, they get recruited by, the standard kind of investment banking or management consulting in certain colleges. And then when you're an engineer, you're a computer science major, who's coming to campus and how do you even navigate that whole process?
Yeah, so I was really good friends with the Career Services Center folks.
That's smart. If my kids are listening, that's smart.
And I basically, every company that would come in and interview interns, I would basically sign up. And the first summer, I probably applied to 30 places and got 0 of the internships. But I did manage to get a summer job at Rice. And then the second summer, trying to remember, I also stayed at Rice, but I had a much better paying job at that point. Nice. By the third summer, I was actually graduating because again, you have this trade-off, right? I want to be a physics major. I could get a computer science degree in 3 years. I'm paying for all of this. So let me go graduate with a computer science degree and then go back to grad school in physics, which was still kind of a dream. And I was also going to go back to Israel to serve the military. So as you can see, I was super confused as a 20-year-old.
You sound like most humans.
Yeah, I was very confused as a 20-year-old. And so those were the choices. Go back to Israel to serve in the military like a good Israeli, because that's what you did, or go to grad school, which was, kind of interesting and appealing. And, either one of those paths allowed me to take a summer job. And this time I actually worked at Texaco and I worked at Nortel. Because the Texaco internship ended up being not what I thought it was going to be. And so make a long story short, a third opportunity came up, which was there was a founder, I guess we didn't even call him that at the time, but he was starting a new software company. And I met him somehow, like while working at Texaco. And he, at the end of that summer, he basically said, hey, I'm starting this company. Would you like to join me? Today, we call that a founding engineer. And I wasn't really sure, but it sounded like a good amount of money. And at the time I was pretty insecure with respect to money. And I remember talking to my dad and he's like, oh, you don't listen to anything I say, but if you like, you'll probably do the opposite, but here's my advice. No one's ever going to give you any awards for going back to Israel at 20 years old and serving. They'll just kind of, they'll pick on you again. Instead, why don't you do this? Work for a year, make some money, and then go back to Israel, or don't. But you'll actually go back with a lot more options. And I kind of thought about it and was like, yeah, maybe he's right. Maybe I should put all this other stuff to the side. Go make a little bit of money, go work for a year and then see what happens after that. And so it was, it wasn't really a set of the set of choices I had weren't like go to work in management consulting or go to work for a software company. Of course. It was like a completely exotic set of choices.
Yeah, it was like apples to oranges. But I am hearing like, before you started talking about like I had an opportunity to make money, I was actually thinking, I don't think he was so money motivated at the time, because it doesn't sound like you were looking at your opportunities through that lens. And I'm curious if you've ever looked at things through that lens, because just in reviewing your background, you've got large companies, smaller companies, startup, founder, you've kind of done it all. And I'm curious how you've made decisions about your career choices throughout time. Is there a lens that you look at now?
Yeah, and I think it's definitely evolved and changed over time. So early on, that was exactly right. I valued my freedom more than anything else. So
yeah. Well, during COVID, now that's actually the big transition after 30 years in recruiting. I'm like, people are like, yeah, you can have your 400,000. I just want to be able to like work close to home or not go in.
For me, it was just, I wanted to feel like I was in control of my own life. And so money definitely wasn't the most important, uh, most important thing or the be all end all. But I also realized that money does buy you some freedom. And so I started understanding some of that trade-off. And I remember talking to one of my professors at Rice, and he wrote me a really nice recommendation letter for grad school. I did actually apply to grad school. I did get into grad schools and I was going to go there. And he said, he was actually joking with some guy who came from the National Science Foundation, and he was kind of schmoozing the NSF person, he was trying to get a grant, and he said, hey, look at this guy, he wants to go back to grad school, to like work for, the hunger wages, so to speak, and, go eat really bad food, just so that he can, get what, a PhD in computer science. That's kind of funny. Like they were kind of, laughing a little bit about it.
Of course.
But he was doing it in a very kind way, right? He was basically telling me, just kind of be deliberate in terms of what you're trying to do. Don't get a PhD just because your dad has a PhD. And that was what you always thought was going to be
right
in your future.
Don't go through, they're just like checking the box, like actually be passionate and connected and mindful of what you
and
really
so I would say, education and achievement were super important as part of my upbringing, and those values were still instilled very strongly in me, both, directly and indirectly. And so kind of stepping away from that was really difficult because there's a lot of value that was placed in academic achievement in our family. And so walking away from that was difficult. But at the same time, I felt like there were interesting opportunities, and there was a lot of the reason why I ended up taking a job at that startup was it just felt like an amazing place to learn.
And so was it?
It was unbelievable. It was 6 years that I spent there, and the company went public, shortly after I left.
Yeah. Did you get founder shares?
The funny thing was I asked for 401k, and the founder kind of laughed me out of the room. And then I asked about insurance, medical insurance. He's like,
right. You're like,
yeah.
You're 22.
Yeah. He's like, we don't have any, but you're right. We should probably get that. So, it was kind of, I didn't know what to ask for. And at some point I did ask about equity, and he said, well, when the company's worth something, we'll talk about equity, it's exactly the wrong time to talk about something.
Yeah, exactly. That ship has sailed.
Right. And, at the same time, he was like a really interesting guy, super smart and a great mentor to me. And at some point you realized, I probably negotiated too hard of a deal with this kid, and he tried to get me, more equity, which he did. And at that point we had investors, and it was a little bit hard. And ultimately the reason why I left Neon was I just couldn't get over. First, it was like I was learning less and less. The company was about to go public, and I felt like I'd learned everything there was to learn there. But there's also this feeling of not being treated fairly, and being the first person in and having arguably built just as much, if not more, than anybody else had built as an engineer over there, and at the same time, kind of being treated like a kid and not gaining the same upside as.
Well, you grew up there, so it's a little bit hard to change that dynamic. Like they still see me as a kid, but now I'm like a full-blown bigger kid. No, I'm kidding, but like I'm an adult now, and I've been in the real world contributing to this company significantly. Yeah, that makes sense. So you left there, and tell me about kind of your choices along the way before starting Aserto.
Yeah, so I got a call from Microsoft, and I wasn't really all that serious about it at first. I thought free trip to the Northwest with my wife, and we were just about to have our first child. This was 1998, and so it was kind of one of those here goes nothing kinds of things. But when I talked to the engineers at Microsoft, I was just floored by how good they were. I ended up talking, like in retrospect, I talked to people who went on to become technical fellows. So I was extremely lucky in the interview loop I had. But I would basically, I ran through a problem that was vexing me, back at my startup. And, the engineer that I was talking to, Chris Broom, he basically helped me solve the problem in 45 minutes on a whiteboard kind of thing, right? And I'm like, what? There's just so much to learn from these people. Like, it was almost like the scales were lifted from my eyes. I thought I was a pretty dang good engineer, and now I realize, oh, there's a ways to go here. So that was a really big motivator to come to Microsoft, which at the time in 1998 was the best software company in the world. Maybe the number 1, 2, and 3 best software companies in the world. And I came from the other end of town. I came from the Unix world, and the world which didn't really take Microsoft all that seriously as a company. So that took a little bit of a kind of an adjustment to realize that, no, these people actually really were good at what they did, and I could learn a lot there.
Yeah. And what was your experience of 2 things? One, what was it like coming to Seattle? Did you experience kind of the Seattle freeze that people talk about? And 2, how would you describe the culture at Microsoft?
So moving here, like I said, we had our first kid, and we were fortunate to be able to meet other young families in our situation that were more or less, I would say within 5 years of we were young parents. We had our first child at 26 years old. And so some of the parents that had infants around the same age were a little bit older, but I was always comfortable with that. And so we did actually manage to create some friendships, which was great. But it is very, very different from Texas. In Texas, the default, kind of mode of meeting somebody is a smile and a handshake and in Seattle, it's not that way.
Yeah, and in Texas, I've not lived there, but I've heard, that whole Southern hospitality, like inviting people over, where people talk about Seattle and they say that they're like, oh, we should totally do something, and then just never follow through. Yeah. So that's how the Seattle freeze has been described to me.
Yeah, and we definitely felt that we had to work at it, and so we did join a synagogue, and in due time, like when our kids went to preschool with Jewish preschool with other kids, we basically made relationships, reformed relationships that way. So we really had only 2. Yeah, I mean, through Microsoft and then through the preschool.
And so Microsoft's culture at the time would be described how?
So I joined, and we were just starting this project that later became .NET. So I was one of the first maybe dozen people to work on this thing, and I helped start a part of .NET called ADO.NET, and we were, almost immediately I realized that like our team was kind of at war with another team, and it was kind of hard to get my head around it. But like I said, adaptability, you quickly realize part of your job is not just building products, but it's also the politics around building things and figuring out who are the influencers, who do you have to win over, like who are the power brokers. And there was just this crash course in, like, I can't call it anything else, in just the palace politics that was Microsoft. And on the one hand, most amazing set of people, like just the talent density is incredible. On the other hand, as Bill, liked to say, he used to say, half my job is trying to get the IQs to add up as opposed to cancel out. And there was absolutely that dynamic, the dynamic of, different teams pulling in different directions and, not really making progress and not really being aligned and focused on building things that deliver customer value.
Yeah, I've heard that. And I've also heard there's the whole politics of learning how to manage up and people taking credit and people hoarding information, and just, I've never worked in a huge company like that. I don't think I would love it. But your kind of net of that experience is that it was a positive one.
Yeah, I learned so much at Microsoft. I really, just like anything, there's obviously plus and minus in every situation, but I learned a ton there. And the first year or year and a half were really difficult because the team I ended up joining was just not well thought of, and
Oh,
uh,
interesting.
had a hard time kind of finding its way.
Yeah.
And we had projects that were canceled, and we had wars and all sorts of things like that, which were just like everything and anything other than actually building stuff.
Yeah.
And then the last, kind of like the first 18 months, I had a 2-year horizon. I basically said, if I'm not making it in 2 years, I need to just, kind of go back to startup land,
Right.
because big companies are not for me. And a year and a half in, I was actually invited to join a startup of my manager and his manager were leaving Microsoft, creating a startup. This was back in kind of like maybe late 99, early 2000, maybe early 2000. So just before the big .com bust. And startups were all the rage at the time, and I was very tempted to do it, but something kept me in my seat, which was, I haven't really seen this through yet. Let me spend the next 6 months just kind of figuring out whether I can make this work. And that was the time where everything kind of came together around .NET. All of a sudden, kind of the politics fell away as we were trying to deliver our first preview to, at this big conference called the Professional Developers Conference. And you started seeing what this company could do if it actually set its mind to doing it. And it was one of the best professional experiences I ever had, was going from 1998 nothing to 2002, shipping this new thing called .NET that really changed the trajectory of Microsoft in the developer community. It was definitely waning at the time, and I think .NET gave us really a new lease on life and a new fresh framework to be able to approach developers with.
Yeah. And how long did you end up staying total at Microsoft?
I was there 13 years. So, I would divide it into, there was a period of time where I almost left Microsoft in 2004 to join a pre-IPO Google. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, I mean, my some friends had gone over there and said, this is just engineer's heaven. By that time, I was more of a manager, a product unit manager, a general manager. And so it was a little bit hard for me to kind of see making that transition. And at the time, Google was starting a Kirkland office, and there were 2 people, and I was going to be the third. And they said, hey, why don't you become the site lead here? And I said, the site lead of 3. That's awesome. And of course, famous last words. I had the Microsoft pattern in my head, and
Yeah.
I just felt like you could never really do anything significant outside of Redmond if you were working at Microsoft. And at Google, as it turned out, like they actually were pretty good at creating these distributed labs. And so
Oh, yeah. No,
the lab at Kirkland and Seattle, there are now thousands of people. So,
oh, for sure. Yeah, there are thousands of people. Do you have any regrets around those decisions? I guess of A, not going with your original boss to the startup. I'm curious what happened there. And then B, the kind of Google opportunity.
I would say no real regrets, because it all kind of, develops and happens for a reason. I think the startup, I had this flash of like how bad it could be, with a conversation that I had with a founder just the day before I had to make a decision. So, there's a kind of like a founder and then a co-founder. The co-founder was my boss. The founder was my boss's boss. And I just had this conversation that I realized, this is not going to be as fun as I think it is.
Yeah. And you have to be passionate and you have to feel that fun because you're putting in, God only knows how many hours.
Exactly.
For many years. So it's like, I got to go all in and believe in my heart of hearts that this is it, or I got to be out.
Exactly. So overall, that one I think was a good decision. And then the Google decision, you always kind of look back and go, financially probably would have
Of course.
worked out very nicely. But
Yeah.
I had work to do at Microsoft, and I still hadn't gotten to, achieve the things I wanted to achieve.
Yeah.
I think 13 years in retrospect was probably a little too long. And I like to say that when I first joined Microsoft, I was, fiercely independent. And I had, this entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
And, towards the end of my tenure there, I started coming to terms with the fact that I had been institutionalized. And
100%. Yeah.
I really started valuing what Microsoft valued. I started buying into the value system there, and it scared me a little bit. I kind of asked myself, is this the place I want to die? And I came to the conclusion that no, it probably helped that I was turning 40.
You got another run in you, or 2 or 3.
Exactly. And, there's more to do than just, be a functionary at Microsoft, even if I was on a CVP path, which I was. So
what was your first move when you realized at age 40, like, this isn't where I want to die?
Yeah, I think I needed a kick in the butt also. I was in Xbox at the time, and there's an interesting story here on how I got there. I was basically working on server and tools, and really the developer division and the cloud stuff, and helped start a couple of the projects that later became Azure projects. And I had this team that was just pound for pound, some of the most tenured senior people at the company. And we basically built something that we were really passionate about. And I was very passionate about what we were building. It lost executive support, and my management chain was the president of STP, Bob Muglia, and the person I was working for basically thought that we should go shoot it. We should kill it. And I fell on the sword on that one. It was one of those things where I really felt passionately about it. I went to Steve and I asked Steve for a stay of execution, so to speak, argued, pretty eloquently, but ultimately said, look, I can't get in the way of this. And I felt like I had one more hurrah on me at Microsoft after that. Went to Xbox, and it just didn't work out. 6 months in, early on, I was convinced, by the person who hired me in that, this was a good next step for me, and that the fact that I wasn't really a gamer wasn't really, gonna, be a problem here. Like, they needed people who understood developer platforms and had that kind of experience. And then 6 months in, he basically came back and said, hey, look, the person that kind of left in a huff and a puff, he kind of wants a path to come back. He wants your job, and I'm going to give it to him. And so I was fired.
Oh my God, that's nuts. Well, it's nuts that they don't look at it as like a whole holistic story versus just like, it seems to me that it should be like, hey, this isn't the right fit for this right now based on this circumstance, but this person who's a rock star who's been dedicated to our company should go back kind of into the pool to choose from your perspective what you want to do.
And that was, I shouldn't say, it was the latter, right? He basically said, hey, look, I'm going to give your job away, and, he gave me plenty of time to try to find another one. But I think that was the kick in the butt that I needed.
Yeah. Right? You're like, this is great. This is actually the kick in the butt that I wouldn't have created for myself.
Microsoft's a warm bath, right? So it's very comfortable. And then it kind of, for me at least, it took something to kind of wake me up a little bit and go, what do I really want to do? And so I spent a little bit of time, trying to figure out whether there was a job at Microsoft I wanted. And, I would say that it helped that at that point, I was probably no longer on the path that I thought I was, like this, super high trajectory path of getting to, kind of higher and higher executive ranks. And, I was also looking at other places, but it really started to appeal to me to go, kind of go do a startup. And I think it was the year that Steve Jobs passed away. And I remember hearing his Stanford commencement
address. Of course, amazing.
And, what would you do if you had one were you to live? And it really kind of influenced me to try something new. And it's super hard to do that. I think that's the hardest thing to do. It's like when you're failing at something, it's easy to kind of toss in your cards and say, okay, I'm going to start over. I want a new hand. But when you're actually, kind of succeeding, not like hitting it out of the park, but succeeding enough to know that things are good. That's the hardest time to actually say, okay, well, I have to care here. But, this hand is still not good enough. I want to actually go aim for the full house
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes people can potentially use age as their default kind of excuse. Like, I might have done this if I had a higher risk tolerance in my 20s. I might have done this in my 30s, but it's like 30 is the new, well, how do I say that? 50 is the new 30. Like everything changes. And there's all sorts of candidates that I meet that are like 50 making big life changes. And sometimes I think there's like that little window at Microsoft where you just have to go. You're going to have to leave.
Exactly. And for me, one of the things that I always made it hard to leave was who I was going to be letting down if I left. And so I found myself in this really interesting confluence where I didn't really have a role with a bunch of people reporting into me that I would let down. B, there wasn't an obvious next step at Microsoft or elsewhere. And so let's go, try this entrepreneurship thing.
Yeah. So tell me about that experience, the entrepreneurship. Like, how did that start, name and the whole kind of origination story?
So one of my friends and I were leaving around the same time, decided to do a company together called Built Steady. And I had spent all my time really on developer platforms and, basically, enterprise stuff. But this was a consumer idea. We were frustrated that there was no good, kind of to-do, list. All the apps were just terrible. They didn't really help you. They made you feel bad about yourself. And we thought that we could do, what today we call machine learning. We could try to reason about what it is that you are doing and try to help you get it done. And it was an interesting idea. And I think there's still some room in the market for that. But, we were just not the team to go build a consumer thing. And it took us about a year to realize it. We did a few iterations of it. We tried out a few different things. There was a chicken and egg problem. You have to get users to get the data to get the magic, but you need the magic to get the users. So it's what we call the cold start problem. And we tried a few ways of overcoming that. But overall, we kind of realized that we had a good run. But it was time to kind of close it down. And the detox period for Microsoft was also really interesting. I know a lot of people talk about this, but you really have to kind of go back and want to go get stuff done every day.
Oh, of course, you've gotten a little spoiled.
Exactly. So nothing gets done unless you do it yourself. And I think you have to be really good with that, really okay with that. And not feel like you're going back to doing stuff that you did 20 years ago. Right,
like this is beneath me. I can't believe I'm age 40 doing these like crazy tasks. I used to have 3 assistants do this. Yeah.
When you're doing a startup, you have to want to go learn things as an IC again. And if you find, pleasure and satisfaction in that, then I think it's a fantastic move. And if you're looking for, a shortcut, it's probably not a good move because you're kind of going back and doing things that, maybe you knew how to do 20 years ago or 15 years or 10 years ago, but those things are no longer applicable because in our industry, everything changes so fast.
I love the fashion. I love the fashion analogy. I've never actually heard someone say that. And I also think you do have to kind of check your ego at the door. Really, that's a lot what you're saying too, without saying it. It's like, I can't have this, like I'm above this feeling.
Exactly. And the third thing I'd say is there's some things that you do know, there's some skills that transfer, but there's some things that I would say I was a general manager, in charge of divisions, and I knew nothing about startup go-to-market, nothing at all, zero. And so kind of coming to terms with that and realizing that I really have to learn from zero, because all the patterns are going to be different. And, I thought I knew something about business, but this kind of business, I know nothing about. I think it takes that, that's exactly right. That humility and that adaptability to really kind of understand that this is not the same beast. At Microsoft, we like to think that we did good work, but Microsoft was a rocket from, the late 80s, early 90s. That rocket was built, the go-to-market was built, and the whole company could have maybe not shown up to work for a year and it would have still done more or less the same that it did.
Yeah.
And coming to terms with that and having the humility to realize, we did some good work at Microsoft, but it probably didn't, really affect the stock price once.
Yeah.
It's something that you also have to come to terms with, I think.
Right. We could talk forever about all of this, but I want to work our way into Aserto and how you and Gert's your co-founder.
Yep.
The good part is you met him at Microsoft. I love that. How did you guys come up with the idea and the name?
Yeah, so we worked together at Microsoft, and he actually came. I had I kind of went in and out of startups in the last 10 years or so. So he worked with me at HP, where I ended up being the general manager, VP of the cloud division. And Gert was the chief architect for the cloud native application platform. And then he came. He and I both ended up at Puppet. And so we kind of went our separate ways after Puppet. And then both of us, I think, were ready to do something new. And I was I wanted to do another startup. And I, was trying to ask myself what was still hard to do that was at the intersection of developers and the enterprise. And Gert was having the same thoughts, and we got together and we immediately kind of gravitated towards authorization. And I guess the story is 10 or 15 years before, we were both looking at identity and access and what it would take to do that in the age of SaaS and the age of cloud. Microsoft at the time had this thing called Active Directory that was basically had 95% market share. And that was the operating system component that told you who was logged in and what they could do. And so every business application had to wire into that. And so, kind of like moving to the age of SaaS where you don't have an operating system to ask anymore because, everything is kind of on the web. That identity system had to be rewritten. And so at first, everybody had to kind of do it themselves. So you had companies like ServiceNow and Salesforce.com and Workday, and they all built login from scratch and they all built authorization from scratch. And the project that we were working on that became Azure Active Directory was all about trying to kind of build identity for the web. And 15 years later, we have whole companies that have kind of been built on top of those standards, like Okta and Auth0, and probably $50 billion worth of market value has been created around that. But authorization didn't move forward at all. And authorization is the other aspect of it. So identity is who are you, and authorization is what can you do. And so there's no help that developers get today on that side. And so we saw this pretty big vacuum. We started talking to CTOs and VPs of engineering about what they do for that. And they all said, we have to build, not because we want to, because we have to, there's nothing to buy. So it just seemed like there was a really interesting problem that we knew a little bit about, that was actually a real problem. And there's no category of software around it anymore. So it was just kind of the perfect opportunity to go start.
Yeah. So you said you went and talked to engineers, but tell me about your background versus Gert's. I know your background because we've been chatting, but did you guys come together and say, hey, these are where we're complementary? And then how did you go about filling in those gaps?
Yeah, so both of us kind of have an engineering, background or upbringing, but I definitely kind of evolved on the product management and general management side. And Gert is an engineer's engineer. He's just a phenomenal engineer, right? So, and phenomenal leader. So he was most recently the chief architect at Hulu, and he's just built so many patterns over time. So it was very obvious that we were complementary.
Yeah,
I was I'd spent the previous 5 years kind of building relationships with the venture community, knowing, how important that was for when I, decided to get back into entrepreneurship again, built a lot of muscle around product and started building a little bit of, kind of patterns around early stage marketing, early stage sales. And Gert, he's the perfect CTO and chief architect for something like this that involves both building a cloud service as well as building a pretty deep distributed system with his background in identity and systems.
Like the perfect fit. And so how did you end up funding the business?
So I basically took a year off after stepping down from Puppet. There were some, personal things, family things that we had to deal with. And I couldn't stay away from prototyping things. So I started building a prototype for something, and I started getting, friends, and later on, angel investors kind of just ask them what was up with that, like whether they thought it was a good idea or not. And in fact, people wanted to give me money. And at the time, I started realizing that it was really about me and not about the idea. And when I started vetting the idea with people who would give me real feedback, they said, well, not the best idea. And so said, great, that's interesting. I know I don't want to pursue this idea. I want to keep iterating. And one of the VC firms that I was pretty close with, Cosanoa Ventures, said, hey, why don't you become an EIR? And I didn't, back to freedom, I didn't really want any strings, but they said, no strings. We'll pay you a little bit of money. You'll give us some advice on our investments. You'll see how it is on the other side of the table. And that was just too good of an offer to pass up, because it involved learning, how investors really think, and also, being able to have most of my time be focused on ideating. And that team was really great to work with. And as we got to authorization, and as Gert and I started really investigating that in depth, it was very clear that Cosanoa wanted to write us our first check.
That's
and so we
great.
went off and basically recruited a bunch of angels that we knew and got connected with, and built a great coalition. So, we started the company, and I think we incorporated in mid-October of 2020, and all the money, hit the bank account. Like, I think it was the first week of November. So we had funding, seed stage funding from the get-go. And, it just, people ask me, how'd you do it? And I said, well, in 3 weeks, but also in 30 years, because
totally, you've got those depth of those relationships, and you've been good to people, and you've got a good reputation, and all of that counts. And so interesting that you did that during the pandemic.
Yeah. And it was, interestingly, it made it almost easier, right? Because some of the ceremony associated with building relationships and flying to the Bay Area and having in-person meetings and partner meetings and all that stuff, none of the ceremony had to
you could cut through it
anymore. So you could just pick up the phone or have a Zoom call and talk to people in half an hour. They'd basically give you an answer.
They'd be like, I'm feeling this, I'm not feeling this, keep in touch, keep me warm. So what was the business model when you first started, as far as how you made money, and how has that changed, or is it the same?
So we're only 15 months old. So, maybe a little bit on the younger side of, companies whose founders you have on the show. But we basically knew that every developer business has to have a great bottom-up, kind of motion, and, a way to build awareness with the target, which is developers. Developers have to love you and have to be your champion in order for you to actually earn the right to, sell into the business. And I think it's becoming true for a lot of other things too. We hear about product-led growth, and that really speaks to user empowerment. If you do a great job for the user and they love you, and you start building, organizational support for, this product, this solution that's solving a hard problem for you, then, it makes it much, much easier to have the entire organization adopt. And I think the same is true for developer technology. You have to have developers that really love you. And so a lot of what we think about every day is how to reach developers, how to increase awareness. And it's the challenge is both a blessing and a curse that there's no category, right? So there's no, kind of nothing that we can say, we're one of those.
And there's not a playbook that you just turn to and say, this is how it's done.
So the good news is that no one's run away with the market. There's no competitor that is at scale that we have to somehow, unseat. But the bad news is that all of us are trying to kind of go build this category of authorization APIs, if you want to call it that. And, it still remains to be seen what it's even going to be called. And I would say the other thing that we've learned and discovered is that in the end, when even a small company wants to go bet their roles and permissions, their authorization model on a developer API, it's not going to be one of those things that's going to start at $6 a user a month. It's going to be one of those things where the developers really need to love it, but then you have to go. The sale is to the VP of engineering or the CTO, and it's really a build versus buy kind of conversation. Hey, it's going to take you 5-10x the cost to go build it yourself. The
And
time
time, yeah.
and time to market is going to be much slower. And quite frankly, we think about security and the security of the solution every day, all day. And that may not be necessarily the competence that you have on your team. And so those three things kind of come together. And the customers who have bought Aserto, they all kind of go back to those three value propositions.
Interesting. And how many people do you have now?
We're at 18 people.
Wow. So growing pretty quickly.
Yeah, we started out just me and Gert 15 months ago, and it's been amazing how we've been able to grow the team and get so much more done than we did.
Yeah, I did review a few things. One, just like about the company culture, words like hungry, humble, empathetic, lifelong learners. And after getting to know you a little bit, I'm like, that doesn't surprise me at all. And then just reading about the company values of customer first. Mm-hmm. Aim high, teamwork, integrity, and honesty. I love this one. Be a driver, not a passenger. That one's a great one for all companies. And be open-minded. Mm-hmm. Do you look at those as kind of like we live by these, like how Amazon does, or kind of like, hey, we just needed something real quick, and now we're going to like really dive deep now that we have 18 people? Or how do you look at company values?
We were really intentional about it early on, and it may not be the first thing that you want to go tackle. The first thing is who do we want to serve, and then what problems do they have that we think that we can address. But I would say it was in January of 2021, so maybe 3 months after we started the company, Gert and I had already had some of those conversations, but I wanted really to put it down, and some of it's just to be able to attract the set of people that we think are going to do well at Aserto. And so the humble and hungry and empathetic and lifelong learner, the first three of those came from Patrick Lencioni. He wrote a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and a few other books since. And I think he has a very interesting philosophy on who is the ideal team player. And that's what that it kind of all goes back to the fact that software is a team sport, building companies is a team sport. Everything we do is a team sport as humans, honestly, or most things, I should say. Even, if you're like if you're, behind every individual, whether it's a rock star or a mountain climber or like at the highest level, there is a team behind them, even if
for sure. Yeah.
And so, if you're really optimizing for building a great team, who do you want on there? And I think humble is important because folks that are not tend to, that tends to belie some sense of insecurity, and insecurity tends to be suboptimal because you're constantly having to trade off between overcoming that insecurity and doing the right thing for the company or the customer.
Right.
So being humble, is the opposite of that. You're basically, it's not really about, building things for yourself or for your ego. It's really about kind of delivering customer value and doing things together. Without being hungry, humble, may not be enough, right? Because you can't just be satisfied with the status quo. Like, to go 0 to 1, you have to just be driven to build something awesome. If you're not aiming for awesome, you're just not going to make it. And so, that hunger is super important. And then, I would say Patrick calls it smart, but what he means is, EQ smart. And I translate that to empathetic. I think if you want to build a strong team, you want people that care about each other and how they affect each other. And so you really want that. And then lifelong learners, I think that goes along with all of these. Like, it goes along with being humble and being hungry, and and being able to kind of have that growth mindset of, we're always curious. We know that we don't know everything, but we're curious to learn.
Yeah. And do you feel, it's so early days, but like, at what point in this journey of Aserto will you feel like, I feel super successful? Like, what's the goal in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, we're aiming for the fences. So, some people start companies because they're looking for some kind of exit. We feel like we have a really deep problem domain, and we could see ourselves working on it for 10 years. And so there's just so much opportunity when you see so much pain around authorization. So you have, obviously, developers have to go reinvent the wheel, and no one wants to do that. I like to say, I want to work on permissions and RBAC, said no developer ever. Right. So there's obviously kind of pain point there. But if you look at enterprises that are buying SaaS applications, they have to live in, dozens, if not hundreds, of different admin consoles that each have their own model.
It's got to be so annoying, so inefficient.
It's soul crushing, right? Yeah. It's soul crushing. And, if you think about security, personnel inside of these companies that don't have a way to look at all of the, the permissions that a user has across all the different applications, and auditors and compliance departments that have to go prove that, they can satisfy all these regulations. Right. There's just all of this pain around this problem of authorization. So we want to, build an independent company, and if we build it right, we think that there's a huge market out there. Yeah. And
they say the size of the total addressable market seems to be somewhat endless for this whole problem. So that's exciting. That's super exciting. Plus, just talking about the competitive landscape as far as it's not like we've got people we're trying to take down. Really good positioning for you to be in. Are you going to be raising another round?
We are. So we fortunate enough to raise plenty of money, and with plenty of runway. But we're probably going to be ready for our Series A in the next few months, and super a lot exciting. Of it's just. We just launched our public beta, which was super exciting, and we're seeing, we're learning a lot from new users that are coming in and, trying things out, and, feverishly building the feature set, and, expanding the offering in the direction that users are asking for. So there's nothing like, kind of feeling that visceral.
The excitement around it.
Yeah. People telling you, oh, this is cool, but it would be even cooler if you did that. And you go, I heard that 3 times. Let's go build that. And that's for a builder, it's just exhilarating.
And the fact that you can, it's not like, no, I don't know how, but talk about confidence around it, because you're not just a sales CEO. You're like, no, I actually know what they're talking about. And you can kind of bridge that gap in your role, which is amazing. So talking about the subject matter, authorization and the pain points, is this what you're talking about around the dinner table? Do your kids know what you're doing?
My kids could only really kind of talk to what I was doing when I was working on Xbox. They're like, right. Yeah, Dad's doing some
something exciting
stuff for, engineers or for developers. And we think it's pretty cool.
Right.
I think that they would be able to, give a little bit of the elevator speech around, roles and permissions and how,
right. But it's not the sexiest of the sexy.
No, it's not. It's plumbing. It's plumbing. And they're roll their eyes,
Yeah. How do you set yourself up for a good week, given how much you're trying to accomplish right now, and given, multiple kids and your wife is working?
Yeah, I think, every week I kind of start thinking about what's most important, right? So there's just so much stuff you could do. And, oftentimes I try to find where the white space is, where the holes are, and just kind of go drill into those and figure out whether there's something I can do, or whether there's a set of people I can activate around it. And even going from, 2 people to 18 people, there's a transition that I'm trying to orchestrate now. I found myself really enjoying being an IC again, and, kind of helping the building process. And I'm now trying to transition so that I'm not the owner of everything, right?
That's smart.
When you have the owner gene in you, you tend to, it's tempting to do that.
Yes.
But the only way to scale is really to empower other people to step up and to be owners. And so those patterns are great to learn in a larger setting. And so I credit, the Microsoft upbringing and, and other big companies teaching me those lessons, but knowing when the transition happens is often really tricky.
Totally. And I was thinking that as you were saying that, I'm like, there are the entrepreneurs, first-time CEOs in their 20s who are like, in order to get it done right, I have to do it all myself. And I'm like, well, that's impossible to scale. Yeah, you've got a really good thing going. I'm so glad to learn more about it and more about you personally. It's going to be really fun to watch this journey. My final question for you is, what fuels you?
Wow. That is such a good question. I think, to me, it's just the journey and the adventure.
Yeah.
So I've, kind of gone from valuing, maybe it's knowledge or achievement or all those kinds of things. Like my biggest, it helped to get into martial arts about
I
15
love
years
that.
ago. I started doing Kung Fu during my sabbatical from Microsoft, and I just earned my 4th degree black belt. And
wow.
One of the
I thought you were going to say Krav Maga, the Israeli.
that would be cool too.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in cross training and other things, but one of the lasting lessons I had there was when I was testing for my black belt, I was still pretty focused on, kind of like the belts, the achievements, like levels, and I recall having a really hard test. It was 6 hours and it was grueling. And at the very end, the person who led it basically asked, would you feel the same way about your performance if you had the new belt in front of you versus the existing belt? Like he was basically asking about the journey. And I said, I thought to myself, kind of, would I be upset or would I feel like I left anything on the table or something? And I said, no, I think I really enjoy the journey. And in fact, I failed that test. They didn't say it. They said, well, you need to recertify and, you didn't but we'll give you the honorary black belt. And I'm like, just don't tell me that. Tell me I failed. I'm good with that. I'm resilient. And that gave me, kind of like, I thought about it. I thought, am I really kind of just in it just to get the black belt, or am I in it because I think that I'm getting a lot of value from the journey? And it was the latter. And I could really look at myself in the mirror and say that. And I've had a lot of setbacks in, kind of that journey of the martial arts, just like in life. But kind of getting that perspective that the journey is the destination, I think has really been, like the last probably 5 or 10 years of my life have been kind of a deeper and deeper awareness of that.
Thank you for listening to the What Fuels You podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, and follow us on social media to keep up with the latest news and episodes. You can also contact us at podcast@fueltalent.com to provide feedback, ask questions, and share topics or guests you would like us to cover in the future. We hope you feel inspired by our guests and that we have helped fuel your day. Join us next time for another episode of What Fuels You.